Imagine you are on the streets of New York in 1899, people bustling everywhere to and from. The sidewalks are often wet and dirty with old papers, food, and other discarded things.
You wake up at dawn every morning just so you can get to work early enough and get enough money you need to get through the day. This was the normal life in the world of a newsie in New York. It was a rough, dirty, and filthy job and often included selling all day until all your papers were sold.
Because money is so important, you would do anything to keep it, and when it is almost taken away from you, you rebel to protect it. Although Americans overlook the Newsie strike is a moral frontier in American history. The strike was one of the first times where children successfully rebelled against grown adults in power. This small movement eventually led the people to confront child labor, forced industrial bosses to consider equal treatment regardless of age, ethnicity, or disabilities, and changed the way leading papers pay back their streetwise sale agents.
The idea of the Newsie started in the year of 1833, on September 4th to be exact, when Barney Flaherty, a boy of 10, entered an ad in the New York Sun to become a newsie.
As a newsie, you were not a paid employee. Instead, you were able to buy the newspapers at a discount and sell them for more. However, you were not able to return any unsold newspapers. So depending on if you sold all your papers, it decided whether or not you made profit.
Being a newsie was tough, dirty, exhausting, and dangerous, and the newsies' working conditions were often horrible. Though some had family, most of the newsies were orphans and lived in lodging houses, which you could only sleep in if you gave them money. If you didn't make enough money that day, you could end up sleeping in the street.
Despite the conditions, it didn't take long for the job of being a newsie to become popular for boys, and even some brave girls between the ages of 8 to 10, and for other newspaper sellers to realize how helpful it was. This also included the newspaper giants of 1899, Joseph Pulitzer, publisher of New York Evening World, and William Randolph Hearst, the publisher of New York Evening Journal.
All was going well when in 1898 the Spanish-American War happened. Though all the newspaper publishers raised the prices of the newspapers for the newsies, the headlines were so dramatic the newsies didn't need to exaggerate, and they often were able to sell papers quickly.
But when the war was finished, it became harder to sell papers. Some minor publishers lowered the prices down again, but Pulitzer and Hearst did not. Wanting to make more money, they kept the prices high. Little did they know that they had just begun one of the most amazing strikes ever. Because of the rise in price and loss in buyers, the newsies lost money they needed for lodging, food, and other needs. The losses became greater than the gain, and when the newsies found out that they were being cheated on and not given the amount they paid for, the newsies got angry.
On July 18, 1899, a group of newsies tipped over a wagon selling newspapers of the Evening Journal and carried off the fallen and deserted papers to sell for themselves.
On July 19, 300 of the newsies met at City Hall Park, decorating the scene with flyers and banners and threatening to go on strike. The office manager, not worried, replied, "Go ahead," not knowing what he had just encouraged.
On July 20th, 1899, newsboys claiming to be on strike armed themselves with staves and sticks and went to where the distribution deposits of the newspapers were. This was one of the first times where they unified and declared what they believed, starting a new frontier, a labor strike, but led by children.
On July 21, 1899, the Newsie strike was official. Newsies from all over the northeast side of New York went on strike, refusing to sell from William Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer's newspapers.
Though the Newsie strike was a group effort, there is one newsboy who is considered the leader. His name was Kid Blink. His real name was Louis Belletti, but he was given this nickname because of an eye patch which covered a blind eye. Kid Blink was already a local figure and a fiery boy, so it was almost a given that he should be the new strike leader. Even with his disability, he led many of the marches and participated, leading several of the rallies.
The Newsie rallies were a huge part of the Newsie strike. This was where about 5,000 newsboys and girls got together to spread the strike and give each other inspiring speeches. Kid Blink made one of the most famous Newsie quotes here. It was,
"Friends and fellow workers, this is the time which drives the hearts of men. This is the time when we've got to stick together like glue. We know what we want and we get it, even if we is blind."
Kid Blink wasn't the only person who was an important leader to the Newsie strike. Though older, Annie Kaylie played an important role in the Newsies' lives. She was one of the main females to help support Newsies. She stood up for the Newsies and loved them as her own children. The newsboys thought of her as a patron saint. Kid Blink was interviewed and spoke highly of Annie, saying, "Anyway, we've got Annie with us. You can bet there ain't no worlds or journals under her skirts." There were many more kids and adults who were impactful to the Newsie strike. The strikers represented a full range of ages, ethnicities, and disabilities. Some of these include 18-year-old Dave Simmons, who is Jewish, Irishman Racetrack Higgins, who is an adult with his partner, Spot Collins, who is 14 and also Irish, and even though there's little known about how many girls participated in this strike, a girl nicknamed Joan of Arc was recognized when she drove off 2 strikebreakers that the boys were unable to drive off themselves.
The newspaper publishers weren't worried at first. A bunch of poor children trying to fight against us. They thought, surely this won't last long. However, in a few days, the Newsies were on strike. The Journal and the World newspaper sales plummeted badly.
Don Sates wrote to Pulitzer, "The newsboy strike has grown into an extensive and menacing affair. It is proving a serious problem. Practically all the boys in New York and many of the adjacent towns have quit selling."
Once other people heard what the Newsies had done, other newsboys and girls took it up. The publishers tried to replace children with grown men. Pulitzer's managing editor informed Pulitzer, "We have determined to hire as many men as possible for Monday to man selling points in a sufficient force to overwhelm any assaults that may be made upon them." Everyone all refused to do it unless the children were paid what they deserved. Soon Joseph Pulitzer and William Hearst were struggling from a strike against them.
Another New York newspaper reported one of the recruited scabs saying, "One of about 100 that signed to take out Worlds and Journals tomorrow, but we say, we ain't a-going to do it. Every one of us has decided to stick by the newsboys, and we won't sell no papers." The public soon, too, began to no longer buy their papers from Hearst or Pulitzer, causing them to lose more and more money.
2 weeks after the first newsboys said they went on strike, Pulitzer and Hearst finally agreed to compromise. And though they didn't lower the price of the papers down any, they promised that they would refund any unsold newspapers. On August 8, 1899, the Newsie strike of 1899 was finally completed and was successful. Because of the Newsie strike in New York, newsboys and girls from all over the United States also started to strike against unfair newspaper publishers. Some of these include Butte, Montana's newsboy strike of 1914 and a strike in Louisville, Kentucky in 1920. It also gave confidence to grown adult workers who were being paid unfairly to stand up for themselves.
It also set a stage for motivating women campaigning for their rights in a multitude of ways. Annie Kaylie, for example, was called the Brick of all women. She not only influenced the Newsies, but she also influenced other women with her strength and loyalty for what she believed in.
Even though they didn't mean to, the Newsies and the strike of 1899 brought some sort of awareness to child labor. In fact, shortly after the strike in Louisville, Kentucky, they had grown adults replace the jobs once held by children, which later led to child labor laws being put into motion.
TLTC blog states, Newsies were a powerful group that brought the issue of child labor to light by showing the world that young workers could show the public their unification. And Newsies stood united and made a change for people to care more about child labor reform. The Newsie strike was also the first successful child labor strike, making it a moral frontier. Not more than a week after the Newsie strike started, Pittsburgh boys, inspired by the Newsies, went on strike against a mill that manufactured chains. Though the strike wasn't successful and the strike was quickly shut down, the Pittsburgh strike was just the start of many more strikes led by children inspired by the Newsie strike. The strike forced people to confront the realities of child labor. For a while, the Newsie strike was forgotten about. That is until 1992, when the Disney film Newsies came out and gave the Newsies and the strike a small bit of recognition they each deserved. And later in 2012, a Broadway reproduction of the Disney film was made and is now able to be seen on Disney+. Though the Newsie strike was not one of the biggest American events, it still left an impact on America as a country, though, fighting against poor working conditions and telling others that age doesn't matter.
Now imagine that you're a Newsie, victorious. You've just defeated the 2 biggest newspaper giants in the country.
You now have a way to keep your money so that you won't lose anything. You can now get better rest and have a better, more substantial life in general.
The Newsie strike was a moral and legislative frontier made in American history. The strike was a successful rebellion against unjust working conditions. It proved that anyone had the power to change the status quo, no matter your ethnicity, age, or disability. It showed that you can work with others different from you and stand up to those who have more power than you if you are willing to pave the frontier.